Melissa had walked this trail dozens of times, but today the silence was wrong. It wasn't the calm stillness she usually loved. Instead, she caught a thin, desperate sound that cut through the air like a cry. She froze and turned her head toward the swampy clearing where sunlight spilled through the trees. The sound came again, sharper, urgent, a high-pitched plea. Melissa's chest tightened. It was no bird. It was something alive and in trouble. She moved closer, her shoes sinking slightly into the damp moss. The clearing opened to a patch of water covered in green duckweed. At first, she saw nothing. Then the surface rippled and a small, drenched shape pulled itself against the muddy edge. A bear cub, no bigger than a medium dog, struggled to climb onto solid ground. Its fur was soaked, heavy, clumped together, its thin squeals carrying pure panic. Melissa's instinct pushed her forward before she could think. She crouched near the edge, her jacket brushing damp ferns. The cub reached out weakly, paws scrabbling for grip, but sliding back into the cold water. Melissa pulled off her jacket, stretched one arm, and with her other hand pressed into the soil for balance. She spoke softly, her voice trembling. "It's okay. Hold on, just hold on." The cub kicked once more, and Melissa hooked her arm beneath its shoulder. It was lighter than she expected, yet its wet body made it awkward to hold. She leaned back with all her strength, dragging the cub over the slick grass. Mud streaked her sleeve as she pulled until the animal collapsed on the moss, coughing and trembling. Its sides heaved, each breath shaky but steadying. Melissa's relief lasted only seconds. The water shifted again. A faint bubble rose through the blanket of duckweed. She leaned forward and her stomach dropped. Just beneath the green surface, she spotted another ear, a flash of dark fur, a small eye half closed. Another cub, sinking. Her heart jolted into her throat. Without thinking, she dropped flat onto her stomach, extending her reach. The water was colder here, her fingers breaking the slimy green layer. She grabbed at the wet fur, slipping once, then found a grip near the neck. The cub was heavier, limp, its movement sluggish. Melissa pulled hard, sliding backward across the mud. She clenched her teeth, muscles burning, until the cub's body flopped onto the bank beside the first. This one didn't cry. Its chest rose only faintly. Melissa tore off her scarf and rubbed the cub's side, then pressed her palm against its ribs. The thin rise and fall was slow but there. She whispered, her words uneven. "Come on, you're still with me. Stay with me." The first cub stumbled closer to its sibling, sniffing and nudging it weakly. Melissa wrapped her jacket around both of them, folding the fabric tight to trap what little warmth she could give. Their eyes blinked, glassy and unsure, but alive. Melissa's breath shook as she pulled out her phone with one muddy hand. She dialed the number for the local wildlife service she had saved months earlier. When the line clicked, her voice came fast, broken by panic. "Two bear cubs. They're soaked, barely breathing. Near the North Trail swamp. Hurry, please." She ended the call, pressing her jacket tighter around the shivering bodies. For a moment, all she could hear was the shallow breathing of the cubs and her own racing heartbeat. Then something else reached her ears, a distant crack of branches. Slow, heavy. Melissa turned her head toward the far side of the swamp. There, in the soft mud beyond the water, prints were carved deep and wide. Fresh tracks, larger than her hand, spread open, pressed into the ground. Claw marks raked the bark of a nearby tree, recent and sharp. Melissa's blood ran cold. The cubs had a mother, and she was close. Melissa paced the mossy edge of the swamp, clutching her phone and glancing at the shivering cubs under her jacket. Every few seconds, she bent down to check their breathing. The first cub whimpered softly, its eyes flicking open and closed. The second lay still but warm under the shared cover. Melissa whispered words she wasn't sure they heard, anything to fill the silence. The crunch of boots broke through the woods. She turned sharply, relief washing over her when she saw a man in a Green Ranger's jacket push through the undergrowth. Ryan, the local wildlife officer, carried a large canvas bag and a calm steadiness in his face. He crouched immediately, scanning the cubs without touching them. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "Keep your distance now. They look weak but alive." Melissa stepped back reluctantly, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. Ryan pulled thermal blankets from his bag and laid them gently over the cubs. He slid small hand warmers inside the folds, creating pockets of heat. The first cub stirred, sniffling against the fabric. The second gave a faint twitch of its ear. Melissa's throat tightened. Will they make it? Ryan glanced up, steady. If they can stay warm, their chances are good. But we need a vet to look at them right away. They've been through more than cold water. Minutes later, another figure appeared on the trail. A woman with a red medical pack, her hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp and focused. Dr. Carter knelt by the cubs, slipping on gloves. Her voice was brisk, practiced. Let's see what we're dealing with. First, respiration. Both breathing, shallow but consistent. Heart rates, fragile but present. Melissa hovered a few steps away, torn between fear and awe. Dr. Carter gently opened the mouth of the smaller cub, then froze. She tilted the head, her brow tightening. Ryan, give me the kit. There's a hook. Melissa's stomach lurched. A shiny curve of metal glinted from the cub's lip, tangled with a thin piece of fishing line. The skin around it was swollen, raw. This is from a lure, Dr. Carter muttered. Someone's careless cast, maybe lost tackle. She steadied the cub's head with one hand, then took a pair of cutters. Melissa covered her mouth as the vet clipped the barbed end and slid the rest free. A tiny whimper escaped the cub, then silence. Ryan disinfected the wound quickly while Dr. Carter checked for more damage. Just a puncture. It'll heal, but it explains the panic. The cubs may have gotten tangled, pulled into the water. Melissa shook her head slowly, anger rising beneath her fear. All because of a hook? That's all it takes? Dr. Carter nodded without looking up. One careless thing in the wrong place. That's how young animals die every season. Melissa's hands ached to hold the cubs, to pull them close. She whispered more to herself than anyone. I just want to keep them safe. Ryan straightened, his eyes on hers. I know, but you can't. Not like that. The best way to keep them safe is not letting them get used to you. The words cut, but rang true. Melissa forced herself to step farther back, though her body leaned toward them. Dr. Carter finished cleaning the wound and wrapped both cubs tighter in the thermal blankets. Their breathing steadied, faint but stronger. Ryan pointed toward the far side of the swamp, where broken reeds bent low. Tracks, he said quietly. Big ones. Fresh. Leading toward the cut-over woods. Melissa followed his gaze. The claw marks on the trees from earlier looked even sharper in her memory. Somewhere beyond that line of stumps and saplings, the cub's mother was moving. Melissa's chest tightened again, not with panic this time, but with a heavy, unsettled question. Would she come back, or had the forest already taken her too far away? The next morning the forest smelled of damp earth and sawdust, the air thick with the lingering scent of cut trees and damp moss. Melissa followed Ryan along a narrow path that wound between leaning pines and the scattered debris of old logging. Every step crunched against broken twigs, and her boots slid on patches of mud that had not yet dried from the night's dew. The cubs had spent the night under Dr. Carter's careful watch in the makeshift shelter they had built from rough boards and tarps. Their breathing had steadied, and though their fur was still patchy with dampness, their bodies no longer trembled. Melissa's own legs still shook from exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. The same question pressed harder with every step. Where was their mother? Ryan slowed at the edge of a clearing where the tree line broke into stumps, ragged piles of bark, and scattered trunks left from the last season's cut. He crouched, brushing aside wet leaves and soil with a gloved hand. Fresh tracks stamped deep into the ground, wide pads, claws carving long grooves. The prints were unmistakable. An adult bear had passed through only hours earlier, her weight still visible in the sharpness of the edges. Melissa knelt beside him, staring at the impressions. Her breath escaped in a shaky whisper. She was here. She came this way. Ryan tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. But look closer. He pointed toward the right, where the ground sloped near a tangle of brushwood. Melissa leaned in and saw what he meant. A few coarse strands of black fur clung to a bent wire half buried in the mud. Her stomach twisted. A rusty loop of fencing wire had snagged something and pulled tight before snapping. The strands of fur told the rest of the story. She got caught, Melissa breathed. That's why she left them. Ryan's jaw tightened, the muscles in his face tense. Maybe, if she's injured, she might stay close but too weak to care for them. Or maybe she panicked when they were struggling in the water. Either way, she hasn't gone far. Melissa looked out across the cut-over ground. The silence of the clearing seemed unnatural, heavy. A lone crow called in the distance, but otherwise the woods held their breath. If the mother was hurt, she was suffering somewhere near. If she wasn't, she could return at any moment, drawn by the lingering cries and the scent of her cubs. "We can't push this," Ryan said firmly, rising to his feet. "The cubs need rest. We'll give them another day. If she comes back, we'll know soon enough." Melissa wanted to argue. Every fiber of her body screamed to go deeper into the cutover, to search until she found the wounded bear and bring her back to her young. But then she caught the hard line in Ryan's expression. His experience carried the weight of truth she couldn't deny. He had lived this before, seen how fast things could go wrong when humans forced their will onto the wild. She swallowed hard and nodded, though the decision left a stone in her chest. They turned back toward the shelter, walking in silence. The cubs were curled together in the far corner under blankets, their small bodies pressed tight, paws tucked under their chins. Their faint breaths rose and fell in unison, fragile but steady. Melissa sank onto the ground just outside the door, hugging her knees to her chest, staring at the tree line. The weight of the forest pressed down on her, hours stretching long with nothing but the caws of crows and the occasional sharp snap of a branch to break the silence. As the day faded, the forest shifted again. Shadows deepened, stretching long and thin across the clearing. The trees leaned closer in the half-light, their branches creaking against one another. Melissa sat awake long after Ryan and Dr. Carter had retreated into their sleeping bags. Every sound sharpened her nerves. The flutter of an owl's wings, the rustle of dry leaves, the faint drip of water from branches. Each noise felt louder, closer, heavier. Then she heard it. A low, rough rumble rolling through the dark like distant thunder. A growl. It came from beyond the shelter, deep among the trees. Melissa's breath caught in her throat. Her skin prickled, and she pressed her ear to the wooden wall, heart hammering so hard it seemed to shake the boards. Another sound followed, louder this time. The clean, deliberate snap of a branch under heavy weight. The steps were slow, steady, circling the clearing as though testing the edges of the camp. The cubs stirred inside, whining softly, their small bodies restless under the blankets. They sensed it too. Melissa closed her eyes, holding her breath, every muscle locked tight. She didn't dare move. The air thickened with tension as the sounds drew closer. The cubs shifted again, their tiny claws scratching against the floor. Melissa knew then, with a certainty that chilled her blood, their mother had come back, and the night was far from over. The growl came again at dawn, low and steady from the tree line. Melissa stood stiff outside the small shelter, her breath clouding in the morning chill. Inside, the cubs stirred restlessly, squeaking faint cries as if they recognized what she heard. Ryan stepped beside her, his hand lifted slightly, warning her not to move too fast. His eyes stayed locked on the dark line of pines. The undergrowth shifted. A heavy shadow broke through the brush, moving with caution but undeniable power. The mother bear emerged, her fur matted on one side, a limp in her step. She stopped short of the clearing, her massive head swinging as she tested the air. Melissa's chest clenched. The bear's nostrils flared, catching the scent of her cubs. The cubs responded instantly. A thin whimper rose, followed by a desperate scramble toward the door of the shelter. One of them pawed at the wood, the other pressed its nose to the gap. Their tiny voices carried through the morning air, sharp and pleading. Melissa instinctively stepped forward, but Ryan's firm grip on her arm pulled her back. His voice was low. "Let it happen. Don't interfere." Dr. Carter crouched nearby, her eyes fixed on the bear. She whispered just loud enough for Melissa to hear. "We need to know if she'll accept them. If she doesn't, it'll turn dangerous fast." The mother bear grunted deep in her chest, then lumbered closer. Each step made Melissa's pulse jump. The cubs squealed louder, pressing forward until Ryan carefully slid the shelter door open just enough. The little bodies tumbled out, still wrapped in blankets, their small paws slipping on the dew-soaked grass. For one tense second, the mother froze. Her eyes locked on the movement, ears raised. Melissa held her breath, afraid the bear would turn away or worse. But the cubs wobbled toward her, crying, their voices raw with recognition. The mother lowered her head, releasing a guttural sound that shook Melissa's bones. Then, with surprising gentleness, She leaned down and nudged the first cub with her nose. The little one squeaked and pressed against her chest. She sniffed the second, pausing at the healing wound on its lip, and licked it clean. Both cubs collapsed against her front legs, climbing into the thick fur of her chest. Melissa felt her throat close with tears. She couldn't stop. All the fear and tension drained, leaving only awe. The massive bear began to lick both cubs, long strokes that smoothed their wet fur. They wriggled beneath the comfort, their cries softening into quiet huffs. Ryan let out the breath he'd been holding. "She's taking them back." Dr. Carter nodded, relief breaking through her stern focus. "It's the best we could hope for," Melissa whispered, almost pleading. "They'll be safe now?" Ryan's answer was steady. "As safe as they can be, with her." The mother bear rose, nudging her cubs closer to her side. She cast one last glance toward the humans, her dark eyes unreadable but steady. Then she turned and moved toward the trees, her limp slowing her only slightly. The cubs trotted behind, stumbling now and then, but keeping close. Melissa watched them disappear into the forest, the sound of their small feet fading into silence. She realized her hands were trembling. Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "This was never ours to finish," he said. "We just gave them a chance." Melissa nodded, tears blurring her vision. The clearing felt lighter now, though her chest was heavy with the weight of letting go. She finally understood. The truest help was knowing when to step back and let the wild heal itself. A week later, the forest carried a different weight. The sharp chill of dawn had softened, and the air smelled of wet pine and wild berries. Melissa walked slowly along the familiar trail, her boots brushing through damp leaves and twigs that cracked underfoot. She hadn't been back since the morning the mother bear led her cubs into the trees. For days she thought about them constantly, replaying the moment they disappeared into the shadows, her mind returning again and again to the sight of small shapes pressed against their mother's chest. Now she had come back, not to disturb, not to interfere, but to see if traces of that reunion remained. The clearing by the swamp looked calmer than she remembered, the surface of the water smooth under the pale sky. Thin mist hovered just above the duckweed, the air damp with the smell of soil. Melissa paused, her chest tightening with memory. The place that had once echoed with desperate cries now held only the buzz of insects and the gentle flutter of birds overhead. She closed her eyes and breathed, almost expecting to hear the squeals again. Instead, silence reassured her, as if the forest itself wanted to ease her fears. Ryan had told her she might find signs if she looked carefully. She moved past the small shelter, now empty, its rough wooden door propped open. The blankets and gear had been cleared away, but faint impressions in the dirt marked where the cubs had curled together. Melissa crouched, pressing her palm against the shallow dips, imagining their small bodies warming each other in the night. She could almost feel the tremble of their breath against her hand, though it was only the cool earth. She rose and followed the path toward the cut-over woods. Morning light angled through the stumps and brambles, making the air glow faintly golden. And there, along the edge of a berry patch, she saw them. Prints. Large, deep, unmistakable. A wide paw had pressed firmly into the mud, claws spread. Just beside it, smaller tracks overlapped in uneven lines, weaving back and forth like children chasing after their mother. Some prints circled, others pressed close together, a picture of restless energy frozen in soil. Melissa's throat tightened with relief. She knelt, tracing one of the small prints with her finger, following the path it made across the damp earth. 3 distinct sets of cub tracks surrounded the larger one, leading deeper into the brush. The cubs had survived, walking with her, eating with her, still alive in the rhythm of the forest. She imagined them reaching for berries, tumbling in play, then huddling close when the night grew cold. For the first time in days, Melissa felt her shoulders loosen. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding, the kind of release that left her knees weak. She didn't need to see them again. The signs were enough. They had made it, and that knowledge filled her chest like warmth spreading from the inside. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. A jay screeched overhead, a squirrel darted along a branch, and the forest carried on, whole and steady. Melissa thought about the hook, the wire, the careless human traces that had almost ended it all. Her stomach tightened at the memory, at the thought of how fragile life could be when tangled with human mistakes. But then she looked back at the tracks and let the sight settle into her chest like a quiet answer. Despite everything, the wild had endured. Sometimes helping meant stepping in. Sometimes it meant pulling small bodies out of cold water or wrapping them in your jacket while your hands shook with fear. Sometimes it meant calling others who knew what to do, trusting their skill over your impulse. But sometimes, she realized, the truest help was knowing when to step back, to trust the wild to do what it was meant to do, to give nature room to repair itself. Melissa stood and brushed dirt from her palms. She gave one last long look at the trail of paw prints before they faded into the green distance. Then she turned toward the path home, carrying with her the heavy lesson, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet peace that came with it. She understood now that her role had never been to hold on, but to let go at the right moment. The forest behind her seemed to whisper with life, steady and endless. Birds sang, leaves shifted with the wind, and somewhere far beyond the trees, the bear family continued its journey. Melissa walked on, her heart lighter than it had been in days, her steps steady with the knowledge that she had witnessed something rare and that it would stay with her for the rest of her life.